time 0859 when the pilots paused their conversations to complete the approach checklist. Right as that was done, the San Diego approach controller called the flight up with what's known as a traffic advisory. Traffic, 12 o'clock, 1 mile, northbound. The captain replied that they were looking, and the controller then added that there was additional traffic also at 12 o'clock, 3 miles, just north of the field, northeastbound. A Cessna 172 climbing VFR out of 1,400 feet. Now, events were about to escalate rapidly. Now, 12 o'clock refers to a model we use in aviation to explain the relevant position of things, where 12 is straight ahead and 3 o'clock is out to our right, and so on. In the cockpit, the first officer now quickly announced, "Got him!" And the captain then reported, "Traffic in sight." And once the approach controller heard that, he instructed Flight 182 to maintain visual separation from the Cessna and to also contact Lindbergh Tower for their landing clearance, which the captain acknowledged, and which also meant that the two aircraft would now be on 2 different radio frequencies. As the pilots of Flight 182 were now preparing for the visual approach, whilst also looking for the traffic, the approach controller contacted the Cessna and reported that there was a PSA Boeing 727 at his 6 o'clock position, meaning behind him, traveling eastbound, and that its pilots had them in sight. On board Flight 182, the pilots now started configuring the aircraft for landing by selecting flaps 2 and then flaps 5. During a visual approach, it's very important to keep the landing field in sight so that the first officer, who was the one who had actually stated that he had the Cessna in sight, was now also the one looking at the field, assessing how to maneuver his aircraft for the approach. Shortly after Flight 182 had initiated contact with Lindbergh Tower, the tower controller advised them, "Traffic 12 o'clock, 1 mile, a Cessna." But during the 20 seconds that had passed since the previous traffic advisory, it seems like the pilots had now lost sight of the Cessna due to a number of different factors. First of all, the CVR transcript shows, like I mentioned, that the first officer was the one who initially had seen the traffic. But he was also the pilot flying, and he was talking on the radio quite a lot as well. So it is doubtful that he would have had the extra capacity to also keep tabs on traffic out of the window while he was looking at the airfield. Now, the flight engineer was theoretically supposed to help scan for traffic here, but he had been late getting started on his pre-landing duties and was therefore still talking to operations. And to be perfectly honest, I doubt that he would have been able to see much from his position anyway, given that he sat behind the two pilots and the Cessna was located below them. The second reason why they might have lost the Cessna was because just seconds before the tower controller's last traffic advisory, the Cessna had made a right turn from heading 070 to 090 degrees without permission. Now, the approach controller had told them to maintain heading 070, so they were obligated to report if they wanted to make a turn, but that for some reason had not happened. But this unauthorized turn now meant that the Cessna had started flying due east, the same direction as Flight 182, but of course much slower. This also meant that the Cessna would have been virtually stationary in the pilot's windscreens, making the small white silhouette almost impossible to make out against the backdrop of houses and urban neighborhoods below. So the 727 pilots wouldn't have known that they were now approaching the Cessna directly from above and behind on the same track. In any case, the Cessna pilots wouldn't have had any chance to see the 727 since it was now coming in from a position directly behind them. The captain then reported to the tower controller, "Okay, we had it there a minute ago." And the controller replied, "Roger," to which the captain added, "I think he's passed off to our right." And here, a critical misunderstanding now developed, all because of one single syllable. You see, on the control tower tapes, it sounded like the captain said, "Passing," while the cockpit voice recorder showed that he most probably said the word passed, as in the past tense. Moments later, the tower controller cleared Flight 182 to land, which was acknowledged, but the pilot's visual search for the Cessna still continued. At time 09, 01 and 11 seconds, the first officer asked, "Are we clear of that Cessna?" To which the flight engineer said, "Supposed to be." The captain said, "I guess," and the jump seater added, "I hope." In the cockpit of Flight 182, the pilots had just lowered the landing gear when the captain suddenly screamed as he spotted something out of the corner of his eye. Seemingly from out of nowhere, the Cessna now emerged from below the window line and shot past the right side of the cockpit as the much faster 727 now overtook it from above and behind. The first officer had enough time for an instinct shout, but there was absolutely no time for evasive action. The 727's right wing slammed into the back of the Cessna, tearing the single-engine plane into smithereens and instantly killing both pilots on board. But due to the massive damage to the right wing's aerodynamics, it now quickly began to lose lift, while the left wing worked perfectly well, and that caused the airliner to start rolling into a steadily steepening right bank. The first officer tried to keep the plane under control by applying full left aileron, while the captain said, "Easy baby," and asked, "What have we got here?" trying to slow down the situation and get a sense of what was going on. The first officer just replied, "We're hit, man, we're hit," indicating the dire truth of what they were now facing. In the last few seconds, the cockpit voice recorder captured the heartbreaking last words of the pilots as they realized that there was nothing that they could now do. PSA Flight 182 slammed into an intersection in the North Park neighborhood of San Diego. Now, when an airliner crashes into a residential area, the results are unfortunately almost always horrific. In the end, all 135 people on board Flight 182 were killed, along with both occupants of the Cessna and 7 people on the ground. And that made this the worst air disaster to have ever occurred in the United States at the time. This accident caused the FAA to start research into what would later become the modern Traffic Collision Avoidance System, TCAS, and the NTSB recommended that controllers should only allow visual separation in terminal areas if it was specifically requested by a pilot. My name is Peter Hörnfeldt and you're watching Mentor Pilot. Have an absolutely fantastic day and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.